I think one of the biggest hurdles engineers face, at least in my experience when stepping into that seller-doer role, is that shift in mindset, moving from doer to connector.
Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about living a life that reflects your values and priorities. Welcome to Engineer Your Success, the podcast that helps you lead with intention and live fulfilled.
Welcome to the Engineer Your Success podcast. My name is Dr. James Bryant, your host for the show. Let me ask you a question. What happens when an engineer who's great at solving technical problems suddenly gets told, hey, now you need to sell, you need to bring in business? For a lot of people, that shift from being a doer to being a seller-doer is one of the hardest transitions in their career. You know your craft, but no one really taught you how to build relationships, connect with clients, and confidently represent yourself and the company. That's where today's guest comes in, Jessica Nuncio, who has spent nearly 20 years helping technical professionals make that leap. She's the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at Naranjo Civil Constructors, and she's known for transforming how engineers and construction professionals think about business development. So, are y'all ready to dive in? I think we're ready. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate being here.
So in some of our discussions, one of the questions that comes up is when engineers hear that you need to sell, you need to become a seller-doer. In your experience, what usually happens?
I think the first thing that happens is they kind of freeze because they don't know what that means. And I think the word seller or being salesy seems really inauthentic. And I think one of the biggest hurdles engineers face, at least in my experience when stepping into that seller-doer role, is that shift in mindset, moving from doer to connector. And they're so used to being the technical experts, the one solving problems behind the scenes, that get the idea of going out to bring in work can feel really foreign to them. And oppositely, right? I'm not a technical person. I'm the connector. And that's kind of the area of my zone of genius. And so it's really fun kind of working with them and meeting them where they're at. We talk about personality types and, being an introvert, an extrovert, omnivert, which is what I call myself, meeting people and engineers where they're at on that kind of spectrum and leaning into their strengths and overcoming their weaknesses to help them in that business development seller-doer role.
So if someone's listening and they're facing that challenge, right, and they're stuck, they don't know what to do, what's the first thing that you would tell them to do to help them get unstuck?
I think it's shifting their mindset. Really is what about being that in that seller-doer role makes them uncomfortable, and getting them to actually lean into that discomfort and to overcome it, and really kind of digging into what those discomforts are to address them head on. So some of those challenges could be, again, the mindset shift of being a doer to connector. It could be trying to balance billable hours with relationship building, and that's tough. There's pressure to stay productive and meet deadlines, but business development takes time and consistency. So it's not something that you can just kind of check off of a list. And I feel like what I've learned, what makes the best seller doers, is when they don't try and become these salespeople. They don't just put on a different hat. Instead, it's their blend. Actually, I feel like they're actually more successful because they get to blend their technical credibility with curiosity, empathy, and a genuine interest in helping clients succeed. And over time, it stops feeling like selling and starts feeling more like staying top of mind and being that trusted problem solver clients want to call first.
This is Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner. If you're an engineering leader who wants to win at work and at home without burning out in the process, keep listening. Every week, I help my private clients bring order back to their leadership, their schedules, and their lives, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they've outgrown their old definition of success and they have no idea what to do next. Together, we define what winning actually looks like for this season of their life. We help them build the clarity and confidence and systems that they need to make it real so they can lead with purpose while staying present for the people who matter most. If this is you, then it's time to take the next step. Visit engineeryoursuccessnow.com to schedule your complimentary integrated success strategy call. Let me help you win at work and at home. Jessica, one of the things that you've mentioned in the past was a framework to help selling or to help seller doers make that transition. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's where my match framework came from. It's a way to make business development feel natural for technical professionals. And the M, if I break it down for you, the M stands for market research. First of all, knowing your audience, your region, your competitors. I like to use the good old fashioned SWOT analysis to see where a firm can really add value. A is for attract and align authentically. So showing up through visibility and thought leadership, whether that's conferences, associations, community work, even nonprofits your clients care about, meeting them where they are and positioning yourself as the guide who helps them solve problems, not just sell services. T is for time and trust. BD takes patience and consistency. And I like to map out with a client journey tool that I use to stay intentional about how I'm nurturing relationships from that first handshake to project delivery and beyond. And C is to connect and close. And it's about leading with curiosity, not just a pitch. So I use capture plans to help me focus on what really matters to the client and helps me document every conversation so that it feels personal and purposeful when I'm communicating with them. And then the last one is H, and that stands for hone and harmony. And I think understanding, I relate a lot of this actually, this match concept actually came from a bunch of us business developers over drinks at a conference, at an SMP conference, just kind of talking about how relationship building and online dating and correlating it to business development. And
Yeah.
so when I'm talking about the hone and harmony piece, it's quite funny because it's like, the relationship, not your work doesn't end once you propose or once you're married. You have to keep going back. It's very cyclical in a relationship building. You have to keep making those deep connections and building that trust time and time again to convert those relationships into, retention. So,
That's a fabulous framework. And I think it also speaks to the power of collaborating with your peers. When
yes.
you're at the conference, you're talking through what these issues are, and you're able to come up with a framework that you can now kind of help business development be more easier to
Yeah.
technical professionals. So I
Right.
do want to talk a little bit about your story. Did you you know, always have this passion for business development, or, kind of let's talk about your journey?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people fell into this role. So I was a first generation college student. My parents were teen parents when they had me at, 17 and 19, married young. And and so there's a lot of pressure on me. I come from a very strong-minded, strong-willed ancestors, my parents, my grandparents and stuff. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurs, working their own businesses, whether it's in construction, house cleaning, and, but no one had a college degree, and so I think there was a lot of pressure, from them and on myself actually to get that degree, and at the time, it wasn't back then, like I did with my daughter with taking her on, college tours and really digging into, what her skills are and what she wants to do and her passions. That wasn't really asked of me. It was more so like, "Here's 3 colleges, pick one." And then picking one, it's like, "Okay, here's their options, pick one." I'm like, "Oh god, okay." I'm an athlete. I was a track athlete, both high school and collegiately, so with the running the 400 meter. So I was like, "Okay, I really like working out. I really like sports, and okay, I guess I'll go this, exercise physiology, kinesiology degree and with the hopes of becoming a physical therapist." So that was my track, and, did very well in college and was part of the McNair Scholars. I got special grants to study and write a thesis as an undergrad, and was all excited. And then my junior year, they said, "Oh, well." Before they required a master's degree to become a physical therapist, and they got rid of that and said, "Now you need a PhD." And I was
Wow.
scratching my head. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I don't think I could afford to go, $300,000 into debt to make 65,000 a year.
Yeah.
The math wasn't mathing for me. So,
So what did you
yeah.
do?
So I worked into the field. I was like, "Well, what can I do?" I'm kinda stuck now with this degree, and I was a personal trainer, did group exercise. I worked at a cardiac rehab facility. I worked at a wellness facility at Craig Hospital, and I found very rewarding work in what I did. It's just I wasn't making the money that I needed to, and at the time, at 24, I became a single mom myself with my daughter, she's gonna be 21 this December.
Wow.
She's doing great. She's the light of my world, but at that time, I was like, I can't afford this anymore, and what are my options now?" And I really leaned into my network and my community, family, friends, colleagues, and said, "Here's my skill sets. How can I transfer these somewhere else?"
Hmm.
And at the time, I didn't really feel like I had many options. I just needed to provide for my child. And so my stepfather, he was a petroleum engineer, but had a lot of connections in construction and friends in construction. So he made a connection that got me into a civil GC firm here in Denver. And I got my foot in the door just as a receptionist. And I thought, if I can just get my foot in the door, there's other things that I can do. And I'm a quick learner. I'm curious, I like challenges, so I knew that it was, only up from there, and really, I was only in that receptionist role for about 3 months, and an estimating coordinator role opened up. Didn't know anything about it. You know, I rose my hand, I was like, "I'll try it." Um, and a temp, gal or whatever was working in that position before. I think I had maybe 2 days of training with her before the keys were kinda handed over to me. And I learned through trial and error and, made a lot of mistakes, but thankfully my team was very patient with me, and it was funny because the estimators at that time really didn't know what that coordinator role was either, but I was essentially the first line of defense for all things estimating. So I
Okay.
was the DBE liaison, I was the one submitting quotes and getting quotes and then dispersing them to the estimators, putting together bid packages, and putting together what we call now these go no go sheets and interviews and all that stuff. And again, without any training, I just kind of really leaned into each estimator, figuring out what I was their guide, right? I was like, Jerry Maguire, help me help you.
Yeah.
And, what do you need from me? And then creating a process around that and a system that worked really, really well. And not everything worked, don't get me, wrong. I made a lot of mistakes, but I tell myself I didn't make them twice.
Yeah.
So and thankfully, they supported me in that. And, from there, we built another team. So we had a secondary coordinator, so then I kinda managed her, and then I was being tasked with other roles. So I wore a lot of hats. That's when marketing was coming bigger into play in business development, and so I was leaning more into those roles, which I really, really liked. I liked managing others. I liked leaning more into those connector types. With a high turnover with the estimators, my boss was like, "You're not one to say no to anything, so how about we teach you how to be an estimator?" I was like, "Well, I don't think that's my skill set," but, over time, I learned how to read blueprints and plans and, dust off some old high school math skills. So that was the best. That was not my forte.
But
Did
you
I
were
do it?
learning the trade and learning the craft.
Yeah, I was learning, and I think it helped by leaning into that uncomfortableness. And I'm sure he found me very annoying at the time because I was always a girl asking why, and, out in the field asking why we did things the way we did. Um, I just wanted to understand everything that there was to understand about what we did, how we did it, and I think that knowledge and that curiosity made me a better, marketer. It made me a better business developer and leader
Yeah.
too.
I don't know if that is the typical story
No.
from receptionist to raising your hand to becoming the estimate coordinator
Right.
to an estimator, then to doing marketing and eventually leading business development. I think that is a unique path, but two, one that uniquely positions you and your perspective on business development because you understand the numbers, how things were put together, and what they're going through or what they may have to go through to deliver on this business that you are developing.
Yeah. And the whole cycle of it, the sales cycle of it, I think coming into this industry, I didn't know what was all involved or the processes or the work before it gets constructed, before boots are on the ground and dirt is moved. There's a whole pre-development, pre-construction process and life cycle that is there that, you know, I wasn't aware of and have so much appreciation for.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's all that pre-work that I really enjoy.
You know how to solve tough technical problems, but leading people, that's a different challenge. Stepping into leadership means more than just knowing your stuff. It's about inspiring, communicating, and navigating challenges with confidence. At Engineer Your Success, we help technical pros like you grow into leaders who just don't manage the work, but lead the people who do. If you're ready to lead with clarity and impact, visit engineeryoursuccessnow.com today, because thriving isn't just for others, it's for you. You started doing business development, but was there a turning point or something where you realized or became aware that business development was a passion that you had?
I think it was when I realized that I didn't like estimating. I think that was the first part. I was just like, I don't really like crunching numbers all day long, and I wanna be out with people and, and make again, kind of connecting people. And so I luckily, my boss at the time, I mean, he would entertain anything that I asked of him. And I think it was through that relationship that I learned if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And so finding my
Mm,
voice and saying, hey, I'm really not liking this estimating work. I'm happy to fill the gap, but I really want to lean more into business development and marketing. And so we kind of had a deal where it's like, okay, find me another estimator and then you can free up more time to do this route. And so we did that, and we agreed that I would at that time, I would just do more of the concrete flat work bids. And so
okay.
it was very similar stuff, copy, repeat. So it didn't take me as much time to do those. It was very important work still for our firm at the time, who did a lot of concrete work, but it didn't take as much mental capacity to get those out the door. So it still supported him in a way that they needed, and then allowed me some more free time to explore more business development opportunities. And, I think with that firm, I got into a place where I'd grown as much as I could, and I didn't see that next path for me there, so I transitioned out of that firm and went and worked for another firm who had more wider market types. So it wasn't just civil, they were in commercial, they were in federal, DoD space. So I found that really interesting. And they were a startup firm. So I thought that was also very interesting. I was like, ooh, okay. And I was their first marketing person at their firm. So I was in charge of developing all their brand, their 2 years in, helping develop their brand refinement, their messaging, their proposals, and their civil group needed some help building their work. So I was doing business development for that arm of um, their business, and we grew fast. And I think it was like over 3,000% over 2 years.
Wow.
And so again, easier to say done when it's a startup firm, but and we expanded. But in my 2 years, we expanded to Alaska and DC, and we like doubled our our employees. And it was exciting, but I found myself getting burnt out quite a bit. And so I wasn't having that family work life balance anymore. And so I wanted to switch back into something that I knew. And that's when I landed at Naranjo. And it was through networking, or he had found me, my boss had found me on LinkedIn and questioned me, and I was open to the opportunity. So
So what was it? I mean, when did you recognize that you were moving towards burnout?
gosh, I think your body has a way of giving you signs, because I think throughout my life and career even, I think I tended to be the yes gal, always accepting a challenge and saying yes, stepping up to the plate. And I realized that every time I did that, there was something I was saying no to. whether that was to my own self-care, to my family, to time with my friends. And my body would react in a way, whether I would tense up, I wasn't sleeping very well, becoming more emotional. I remember there was times at that job where I would just my breaks consisted of me going out to my car and crying, and just the pressure that was on me. And I would work, 60 to 75 hours, taking work home. And this was all also during COVID, so we were working at home. And so having that, not knowing when to shut it off,
Yeah.
the lines were blurred, hours were blurred, and, I think it was my daughter at one point, where she had said, "Mom, we hardly see you anymore." And they're in high school, and she's getting ready to graduate, and I said, "I don't want this." I wanna enjoy these last few years that I have with her. And, honestly, it was taking a toll on my marriage too. I got a divorce 2 years ago, and I think, we were growing apart, but, um, I think just the hours that the work was consuming, I it was an eye opener for me. And luckily, when I came over to Naranjo Civil, it was a firm that is really high in culture and appreciates their employees, and wants to seek ways where they can find work-life balance for them as well. So I'm very autonomous in my work. There's no micromanaging, and there's a great team culture. It's very supportive. So I feel like I do have more of that balance here now.
That's good. Are there any particular practices that you've put in place to kind of keep your hand strapped to your side so you're not always raising your hand and saying yes for
Right.
for the next thing?
Right. Well, I think it's I have to pause. And I know you've talked a lot about this too, as far as time management, right? With what can you delegate, what can you outsource or just say no to. And I think I've used similar tools such as that, where when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I need help with X, Y, or Z," first thing I do is I don't say yes right away. It's like, let me get back to you. And I look at my schedule, I ask them what's the priority level of this, and then, am I the right person to do this, or can we outsource to someone else? Can we delegate it to someone else? If it's low priority and it's not going to move the needle, then let's just get rid of it. So I think being more empowered to say no. And when I have been challenged, then it's like, okay, well, then here's the other list of things that are on my plate. If I say yes to this, which one of these things is going to come off?
Yes.
You know, we're going to swap. We're not going to add
We're
to.
not gonna pile on,
Yes.
we're gonna swap responsibilities or these tasks depending on what the priority is now,
Right.
because there's
Yep.
only one you, and there's
Yes.
only 24 hours in a day, and
Yep.
you need some time for yourself to recharge.
Exactly.
What are some of the other self-care practices that you've been able to institute since making that change?
I think time blocking has probably helped me the most, because even at Naranjo, I still wear a lot of hats, versus, comparative to someone in my role at, say, like a larger firm like a Kiewit or something, where they have a lot more resources. They have multiple business developers, multiple marketers, graphic teams, communication teams. So it's many of the hands lighten the load, but it's just me. And so, I am kind of the seller doer, and so to speak. I'm writing the proposals, marketing, branding, and all the things. So I think by chunking my time on my schedule with time blocking, I'm able to be 100% present in whatever function or task that is at that time. And then I also time in self-care. So if I have a lunch, it's for me, and I'm sitting at a table and I'm enjoying my lunch. I'm not in front of my computer. And then having, strict cutoff times. There's always work to be done. And, unless it's like a deadline, if it's other BD work or doing market research or market planning, I mean, that can be done and held off the next day. So giving myself permission to shut things down, prioritize my schedule the next day so that I can have a relaxing evening to myself doing whatever I want to do.
No, I love it. But these are lots of the same things that I work with clients on doing, lots of the
Mhm.
same kind of processes, but it's beautiful to hear it from someone else. So, you other engineers, you other people that are here in industry, she is implementing this. I am not just saying this because the quote unquote good things to do. It is possible to design a life where you can win at work and at home. where you can absolutely have success in both places.
Yes. Yep, for sure. And I think also having my family hold me accountable, because sometimes, if I'm in a strong workflow and I'm in the zone and I just want to keep working, and sometimes it takes my daughter to put her hand on my shoulder and be like, "Mom, it's 6 o'clock. I think it's time to shut down. You know, I want to have dinner with you."
Well, I think that that's great too because you've invited them in and you give them permission to hold you
Mhm.
accountable.
Right.
So many times we don't invite our family in because we don't want them to hold us accountable. We don't want to be held accountable. So I think that's great. So what else is exciting for you these days? Jessica, really thank you for sharing your kind of your self-care practices and going from burnout to carving out that time so you can win at work and at home. What else is really exciting in your world these days?
That's a great question. And I think leaning more into leadership and mentorship. I think, lifting up others as you climb. As I said before, kind of with my journey, I came from a lot of, strong and powerful minded entrepreneurs on both, the men and women in my life. And wanting to pay that forward, I think is important for me. And mentorship has been a huge part of my journey, both giving and receiving it, whether it's young aspiring leaders, new business developers, or my own daughter. I think for me, it's teaching them to have or empowering them to have the courage to speak up and letting them know that their voice matters. Staying curious because it builds confidence, and building connection, I think, is one of the greatest leadership tools, in along their career path. So, and specifically, I found through my work leaning more towards, being a woman in construction has been hard. My journey's been, you know, riddled with, obstacles. And so I think empowering women who are similar in these male dominated spaces important to me, as well as the BIPOC community. I've spoken on a couple of BIPOC panels and podcasts, and especially with the current, political landscape and kind of limiting and the DBE and those businesses. I think it's more important to me to want to, help women and minority owned businesses or individual professionals in their leadership growth journeys in their businesses, what through my experiences, whether it's through Match, whether it's through, building and scaling their business. Again, kind of meeting them where they're at and then finding ways to find that alignment, whether it's on a marketing or business growth journey or just plain leadership, mentorship.
Okay. But what's one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? Like if you had the ability to kind of mentor your younger self, what would one piece of advice have been?
Mm. That's a good question. I think for me, if I had to, I think it'd be knowing that you don't have to fit in to belong, and that sometimes your differences, your own unique differences, can be used to your advantage. So I think for me, when I think about that, because the struggle being a woman in construction has been hard, but it's also been very beautiful. And I think some individuals feel like they have to blend in and they have to fit in, and you lose yourself when you're trying to do that. And that shouldn't be the goal. Authenticity should be the goal. And each of us have unique strengths and powers. And seeing that as a strength and using that to your advantage, I think can be very, very powerful. And so for me, I think it's been my ability to connect with others on deep levels and helping others, whether again, I'm not that technical person per se, but helping them solve other problems, whether it's getting them connected with a person who can solve their technical problems, or even just if it's on a personal level and understanding them as human beings, because that's one thing we all share. Leave out the titles and the, technical expertises on the table. We're all humans. I think connecting with them on that level can be very powerful. And it's helped me a lot in my professional life as well as growing my business.
Okay. So you've said a few times that being a woman in
Mm.
construction can be hard. Can you just give the listeners just a glimpse or a sense of some of the things that you've had to go through?
Yeah, I think it's stereotypes. I think earlier in my career, not when I was a receptionist, but I think I recall this one time when I was an estimating coordinator and I was attending a pre-bid meeting. And it was a mandatory pre-bid meeting. So they're passing around the sheet, right, that we all have to sign with our information. And I was sitting there and there was this seasoned gentleman, I'll call him. I don't know what age he was. He was silver haired. And then next to me was one of our project managers. And I don't know, he's probably like in his 30s or 40s at the time. And so the elderly gentleman signed his name and then he took the clipboard, passed it over me to the gentleman to my right, my friend, my colleague. And I kind of looked at him. I was like, "Excuse me." I was like, I need to sign that." And he said, "No, you don't, hun." He says, "This is a mandatory meeting."
Ooh,
And I was like, "Oh, heck no."
that wasn't that long ago. Like
That
in the
wasn't
grand
that was
scheme of
like
things,
17, yeah, like
yeah,
probably it was probably like 16, 17 years ago.
it's still. I mean, it wasn't. It's not like that was ancient history. That's what I'm
Right.
talking. It wasn't
Yeah,
that
yeah,
long.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And and I kind of froze. Internally I'm like cursing, but I'm like, I
Yeah,
need to keep it professional. And I just kind of froze. I was like, "Are you serious right now?" And luckily, my colleague, my friend, grabbed the clipboard, handed it to me. I signed my name. The gentleman, the elderly gentleman rolled his eyes and kind of huffed. And then he signed his name and we went about the mandatory meeting. And then afterwards, my colleague approached the guy and gave him a piece of his mind in a, respectful way, but pretty much, you know, told him that that was very disrespectful and that he needed to change his tone. And then we had a talk about it afterwards, but it felt nice that I had an ally, someone
yeah,
who, supported me. And I think being a woman in construction, that's important, right? Is to find your we talk a lot about mentorship versus sponsorship. And mentorship is, you need those because they're the ones teaching you how to do that job or that role, tips, tricks, guiding you on the daily stuff. But the sponsor is the one who's opening doors for you to
yeah.
get you to that next seat at the table. And it's also similarly it's important to have your allies and your advocates. And I think seeking those out early on in my career and leaning on them really helps a lot.
Okay. No, I think that's great, and I really do appreciate you sharing because some people that are listening to the podcast have no clue that
Right.
things like that are happening. Even though this was 16, 17 years ago,
Right.
you know, some things like that still happen
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. And some
And
of them are minor. Some of it is I see a lot of people where there's a room full of professionals all on the same level, project managers, engineers, whatever. But if there's one or two women in the room, for some reason, they're the ones that are asked to go get coffee for the team or for the meeting or go get, this and that. These more kind of these gender roles, I guess, if these traditional gender roles that are expected that I still see to this day. The
yeah.
errand runners or the task, the little, it's like, okay, well, Joe over here can do that. Why don't you go ask Joe? He's capable. Yeah. Yep. I remember one of the firms that I worked for, I was, trying to position myself for the next leadership role.
Mhm.
And I was straight up told by one of the executives, no woman will ever have decision making authority here. I'm like, okay, well, then it's my time to leave.
You know, time
Next.
to go. No, so
Yes.
Jessica, I really do appreciate you spending time telling us about your story, talking about some of the challenges that you faced and have been able to overcome. If someone is listening to this episode, they want to reach out to find out more about your match concept or just about you in general, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Definitely on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best way.
Okay. Well, I will include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Is there any other key point you want to talk about today?
If I could impart anything to the listeners, it would be that success isn't about, and I'm learning this now, success isn't about climbing the ladder. It's really about building bridges that others can cross. And as leaders, we all have that responsibility because we're all going to age out at some point and preparing the next generation, the next group of leaders to rise up and empower them.
I love that. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. So you've been so gracious with your time and answering all of my questions. We're going to flip the script. And what's one question that you have for me?
Okay, so knowing that you are an entrepreneur, coach, and leadership mentor, and you're also an engineer, I'm curious, what's one engineering principle that you apply in your coaching or leadership?
Ooh, it's pretty interesting that I would say that from an engineering principle, from a design perspective, that you design from the top down,
Mhm.
but you build from the bottom up.
Right.
So if you're looking at a house, you're going to design to make sure that you have the roof loads, and then you go down layer by layer. So if you are thinking that within a coaching concept, what's the vision that you have for what success looks like? Right? Let's get that top layer, that top picture of what you want to do. And then we make sure level by level that we have the things in place that can support all of the things that you want to do. And then when we go to build it, we get to the foundation and we build from the ground up to the vision that you want.
I love that you apply that to an engineering framework, and I'm sure it works really well with the people that you do coach.
Jessica, thank you so much for such a delightful conversation. In reflecting on this episode, here's something that stood out to me. People don't burn out because they aren't capable. They burn out because they keep saying yes to responsibility, to opportunity, and to expectation without stopping to ask, what's it costing? The warning signs don't always show up as a calendar alert. They show up in your body, in your sleep, in your emotions, and in the moments where thoughts of work or issues of life never really shut off. If you're in a season where you're being asked to stretch into selling, to leading, or carrying more than you ever have before, pay attention to those signals. Discomfort isn't always a sign that you're failing. It often means that you're growing. But exhaustion, that's a sign that you are not listening. So here's a question that I want you to consider this week. What is your body telling you that your calendar is not? Because your ability to listen to yourself, to those signals and what actually is happening beneath the surface, and then to respond is key to winning at work and at home. This is Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner, and I want you to be great this week. Thanks.